Hi, welcome to the Art Channel. Today we're here at the Royal Academy of Arts in London and we're looking at Marina Abramovic, performance artist who's been making work for 50 years, and it's very challenging work and still challenging.
So Grace, what do we learn from this large retrospective dedicated to Marina Abramovic?
I think firstly that she's been making work for 55 years and pushing the boundaries for herself and for her audiences for 55 years. And there is a lot of nudity in the exhibition, and that still gets us to question ourselves, our comfort zone, how we want to interact with a piece of work. So that is still relevant, I think.
I really admire artists who have that singular focus, that dedication. It's an enormous commitment and discipline that she exhibits in her work, particularly the performances that endure over several days, that involve this immersion of herself, of her character, her mind and her body in a space, interacting in particular with an audience. And that evolution, that sort of experience over the course of perhaps even a month, such as that show she staged at MoMA in New York, where the audience would line up to view her and sit opposite her. You know, these are remarkable feats for any performer.
I think they're also remarkable feats for any audience. We have short concentration spans, we expect everything in a few seconds now. So to sit through a video or a performance which might be hours or even days long is weirdly a bigger ask now maybe than it was in the 1970s. I wanted to ask you, given that there are a lot of performances that have been restaged, you know, Abramovic is in her 70s, she hasn't been well, and she does say she wants to kind of spread the love, she wants to share opportunities for younger performers. Do you think that they can have the same power now?
I certainly think that the sort of theatricality of performance remains relevant and exciting and engaging. What is perhaps more problematic is, in a retrospective, how you reenact a performance through archival material such as photographs or film, because of course there's a distance and a gap. You are experiencing this original piece at second hand.
Given that most of, or many of our experiences of perhaps the arts are online now for global audiences, I think it's quite interesting that we are confronted with real people performing in our space. I mean, the proximity is still, it gets us to question how we behave in galleries, doesn't it?
It does indeed, and there is still, as you said, the shock of seeing nude performers or performers who are thoroughly engaged in that particular task that Abramovic or perhaps another performance artist might give to performers. And there's something almost monastic or quasi-religious about it in terms of that focus, that immersion, that concentration, and there's a sort of abnegation or sacrifice involved. You know, it's almost like a religious rite, and that's of course problematic.
Yes, there are, even though she's, I think, a person without that kind of formal belief, there are lots of references to a communist regime, to a religious background, and as you say, rituals, performances. And I think, you know, what you were saying about just the feat of doing these things, it's an incredible thing to do, and you have to be very focused and I guess quite spiritual in a certain way, but also it's really tough. You have to be very fit, very strong, and you know, it's like a piece of athletics. It's a hard thing to do.
In a house with a view of the ocean, she performed for 12 days non-stop on a stage comprised of 3 different platforms. She didn't eat any food, she just drinks water. So there is a toilet for her to urinate in, a bed or a plank to lie on, and there are, as it were, ladders with knives as steps. So it's a very extreme environment. She's sleep deprived, she's food deprived. It's almost as if she is testing the limits of her physical and mental endurance.
And you're right, in several performances through the decade, she has come close to death. She has passed out, become unconscious. She has taken drugs as part of performances, and they've had an effect on her consciousness. Extreme fatigue, sleep deprivation, food deprivation. They're very, very tough and continue to be so over all those decades. So I think as an audience, it's kind of, it's up to us to step up to the mark. We have to kind of try and be in that space and understand.
When these performances first began and happenings in the late 50s and early 60s with Fluxus, there was a great deal of resistance and shock and surprise. But of course we can date performance back to Turner coming to the Royal Academy on varnishing days before the opening of the summer exhibition to perform in front of an audience. So there is now a long history of artists being present in the moment, enacting a particular kind of rite or ritual. Of course, we need to discuss the ways in which perhaps Abramovic's work is problematic or open to criticism or doubt. In what ways do you think that her work sometimes might be sort of challenging, difficult?
I think perhaps the language that was used in perhaps the 60s and 70s to describe other communities, other belief systems would, for me, be quite problematic and would need to be kind of cracked open and spoken about, perhaps with more care and sensitivity. I think there are some broad terms which we would no longer use. She says she's not a feminist, very strongly. There are issues about what you put male and female bodies through, but I think in this exhibition, fundamentally female bodies, there's a slight fetishism, there's definitely voyeurism, and we have to grapple with all of those things as an audience.
I think that at times there's a danger for performance artists like Abramovic, who are pushing themselves into extreme, to arrive at a kind of almost masochistic hedonism. There's a euphoria to that extremity. And we become complicit in watching things that are inevitably and intentionally uncomfortable. But however, I think there's a danger of a sort of cult-like reverence emerging around performance artists, a kind of charismatic quality that is a little bit dangerous.
I agree, and in that way, very, very close to perhaps religious performance and religious ritual across many belief systems. So there are strong analogies with that kind of, as you say, sort of cult leadership.
But at its best, performance art crosses into the realm of theatre, and that magic and that sense of catharsis that can arise out of performance. And this goes back to ancient Greece, the ways in which these rituals kind of release emotion and free us and allow us to participate as a group together to really encounter quite profound emotion.
You're right, we are asked and expected to step into the space, and if you don't do that, you don't get it. You don't come to the exhibition, you don't participate in the exhibition. And I think it's brave of her to still be making performances which ask us to be part of them. It's still uncomfortable. So in that way, it's still powerful, and the need to watch and to participate is, it's always a kind of conundrum, isn't it, when you're in a show like this? And you're right, we are looking at things which are very testing, very difficult, but we've always done that as humans. As soon as we had community and society, that's what we did.
The irony, of course, is that performance has its roots in the avant-garde, in radical gesture, in being outside the artistic establishment. From the futurists through the Dada artists, they were very radical and explicitly rejecting established conventions in the wider society and also within the art world. And here we are in the Royal Academy, the sort of apogee of the art world, and Marina Abramovic has arrived, as it were, in the temple of art. And inevitably there's a paradox there, but we need to acknowledge it.
We do, and she wants to be here. She's filled up all the galleries. She's the first female artist to take up all of these galleries. not a great thing. But she has arrived and she is the institution now, you're right. She's no longer outside, she's inside. But the trick I think she still pulls off is that she's part of the establishment, but we are still fairly uncomfortable. I mean, these performances are, as we've talked about, very challenging, but actually on one level they're very simple. There aren't many props. There's not a lot of theatre in that way. It's really about human beings and the spaces between us.
Finally, I'd just say you have to respect that commitment of a lifetime to a particular project, to the development of performance art, to the way in which Marina Abramovic brings herself 150%, as she refers to it. You know, she exceeds the capacities that we expect of the human body and the human mind.
I think it would just be interesting as an addendum to think about what she's going to do in the future. She has, as she talked about, been really quite seriously ill, and she talks about having more fun and having more humour in her performances. So I think that's, you know, there will be a change, there will be a development, which is quite exciting at this stage in her career.